Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Israel and Hamas agree to release 28 hostages, 10 alive and 18 dead, in exchange for prisoner releases, but insists on an end to the war and a full Israeli withdrawal. Trump's envoy calls the group's response totally unacceptable as the Gaza humanitarian crisis deepens. At least 7 are dead and 30 injured after a train crashes into a collapsed bridge in Russia's Bryansk region near the Ukraine border. Authorities blame illegal interference for the deadly incident. Beijing fires back after US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth warns of an imminent Chinese threat to Taiwan, calling America the region's biggest source of instability. Speaking at Asia's top defense forum, Hegseth urges allies to boost military spending to deter Beijing. The White House confirms President Trump has sent a new nuclear deal proposal to Iran via Oman, urging Tehran to accept and halt its enrichment surge. The move follows a UN report warning Iran now holds enough highly enriched uranium for 10 nuclear bombs. New German Chancellor Friedrich Merz will visit Washington on Thursday for his first meeting with President Donald Trump. The trip comes amid strained US-German ties over trade and the war in Ukraine. At least 87 people are arrested in Istanbul as protesters mark 12 years since the Gezi Park uprising, defying police barricades near Taksim Square. Demonstrations come amid months of unrest after the arrest of opposition mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu. Flash floods devastate Mokwa in central Nigeria, killing over 150 as rains sweep bodies miles away and level 250 homes. Red Cross teams expand the search with dozens still missing and 3,000 left homeless in the disaster. 19-year-old Desire Adu stars as Paris Saint-Germain destroy Inter Milan 5-0 in Munich, claiming their first ever Champions League title. Adu scores one, assists another and leads a young, rampant PSG side to a record-breaking final win under Luis Enrique. We start in the Middle East this morning, where Hamas says it has responded positively to a US-backed ceasefire proposal, but is seeking amendments to the terms. The group emphasized its demand for a permanent ceasefire and a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. Reportedly, a Hamas official said that the group has not rejected the proposal, but considers Israel's response incompatible with what had been agreed. Another Hamas official accused US envoy Steve Witkoff of complete bias towards Israel. Witkoff, who authored the proposal, has called Hamas's response totally unacceptable and said it only takes us backward. He added that the group should accept the current framework as the basis for negotiations. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Hamas continues to reject the US plan and has vowed that Israel would continue operations in Gaza to secure return of the hostages and defeat Hamas. Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz blamed Hamas for prolonging the war by refusing to release the hostages and disarm. Under the proposed deal, Hamas would release 10 living hostages and the bodies of 18 others in exchange for the release of Palestinian prisoners and detainees held in Israel. Meanwhile, in Tel Aviv, protesters gathered at Hostages Square, calling for the release of the remaining hostages and an end to the war in Gaza. We're now joined by Jim Rice, who is a professor of international law located in Vigan, the Philippines. Thank you very much, Jim, for joining us. Hamas says it hasn't rejected this deal, Jim, and obviously these ongoing diplomatic developments, they seem like a never-ending game in chess. Is this a significant move for you today, this ceasefire deal proposal being accepted?
Well, I think everyone is hoping that this conflict will draw to an end. So yes, I agree. As to whether an agreement will eventually be made, I'm not sure. I think that the sticking point is probably, the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza and a permanent ceasefire. But I would think that one of the things that your segment didn't mention was the food aid, or rather lack thereof, the lack of food aid. And I believe that, as a start, Israel just simply has to allow the unrestricted flow of their vital aid to those people who are starving in Gaza.
Also, Jim, we know the details of what side wants. We have the full disarmament. Hamas has been very clear that it wants an end to this war. Israel, once again, have already offered a temporary truce of 60 days, along with a return of all the hostages. Do you think this deal is really going to get done? I mean, the two contradicting objectives here, they seem untenable. They seem unable to reach a compromise.
Well, that certainly has been the case in the past. I mean, so far, there really hasn't been a compromise. There was a ceasefire prior to the second Trump administration that fell apart, and things have only deteriorated since that time. Again, if I can just, bring my perspective of international humanitarian law, what seems to have been the case is that Israel has been using food as a weapon in this conflict.
Yes, and we'll get onto that very briefly, but Netanyahu is also feeling political discontent within his own country. We've seen the visuals of the protests going on in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and other Israeli places alike. What are your thoughts on the domestic backlash that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing, the domestic pressure he's facing from Israeli residents to end this war?
Well, yeah, that's a very good point that you're making. Netanyahu is really in a difficult position because his government is being kept afloat or kept in power by a loose coalition of very hardline right-wing parties. And at the same time, he's facing, as you mentioned, this grassroots body of more progressive individuals who would really like to see an end to this war. And I believe that if the conflict were to end, say, tomorrow, Netanyahu's position as prime minister would be very weak indeed.
Yes, and Jim, Hamas says Steve Witkoff is a biased mediator. Does that undermine America's role? Obviously, the US is a staunch ally of Israel. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, Steve Witkoff isn't actually a mediator. He's not a diplomat. He's basically a real estate developer and a golfing buddy of Donald Trump. So I don't really see him as being qualified for this kind of very, very difficult international mediation. But is he biased? Yeah, I would say he is.
Yes, and we need to talk about, obviously, the humanitarian situation that is ongoing. The world is responding. There is growing opposition globally, and we're seeing it happen with governments as well. You also have this controversial private aid distribution, these points where these 4 points in the Gaza Strip, 3 of which are in the south, 1 of which is in the center of Gaza. Some people are saying that they are weaponizing aid. Some people are saying that this private organization, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, has selectively chosen its points in order to displace the people of the Gaza Strip. What are your thoughts on the current humanitarian state in the Gaza Strip, Jim?
It's catastrophic. again, these people in Gaza have been relocated so many times. I'm not sure if anybody can really keep track of how many times they've been forced to move from one location to the other. And in all of these locations, the conditions have been appalling. Throughout this time, they've been subjected to bombings and attacks. So it's just a very difficult situation, and one can only hope that a ceasefire will be put in place, and that end to the bombings and the attacks
Jim
can
Rice.
be put in place.
Jim Rice, thank you. You are staying with us. We now move over to Europe for our next story, where Russian drone and missile attacks on Ukraine have killed at least 2 people, as per reports. This comes as Ukraine ordered the evacuation of 11 more villages in its Sumy region bordering Russia. Russian troops launched an estimated 109 drones and 5 missiles across to Ukraine on Friday and overnight, adding that 3 of the missiles and 42 drones were destroyed, and another 30 drones failed to reach their targets without causing any damage. The attacks came amid uncertainty over whether Kyiv will take part in a new round of peace talks early next week in Istanbul. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that some 50,000 Russian troops have amassed in the area with the intention of launching an offensive to carve out a buffer zone inside Ukrainian territory. Meanwhile, Ukraine's top army chief, Oleksandr Shyrsky, has said that Russian forces were focusing their main offensive efforts on the Pokrovsk, Torets and Lyman in the Donetsk region, as well as the Sumy border area. Now, in a related development, at least 7 people have died after a highway bridge collapsed onto railway tracks in Russia, close to the Ukraine border. The train was reportedly going from the town of Klimovo to Moscow and was in the Vinnytsky district when the collapse happened. The bridge in Bryansk brought down several heavy trucks onto a moving passenger train as it collapsed, with 31 people also reportedly injured. The Russian Emergencies Ministry said fire and rescue units were attempting to find people who had been travelling on the train. Meanwhile, Moscow's Interregulational Transport Prosecutor's Office said investigation has been launched. Let's once again turn to the Middle East, where Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says Tehran will not accept pressure over uranium enrichment. Speaking in a recorded statement, he said Iran has the legal right to enrich uranium and will not give up that because of foreign concerns. He called for demands to halt enrichment, a form of domination. This comes as the United Nations nuclear watchdog says Iran carried out undeclared nuclear activities at 3 different sites. The agency's report also confirms a sharp rise in Iran's stock of uranium enriched to 60%. That level is close to weapons graded. The report says Iran now holds enough material for multiple nuclear bombs if enriched further. Western powers plan to table a resolution at the IAEA board meeting next week. Iran denounces the report as political and unbalanced. Let's listen in to Iran's foreign minister.
بله اگه حرف سلاح هسته‌ای باشه سلاح هسته‌ای از نظر خود ما هم مردوده و ما هم پرچمدار نفی سلاح‌های هسته‌ای بودیم و هستیم. این که اونها میگویند شما نباید غنیسازی داشته باشی در حقیقت یک جور تحمیل سلطه خودشون بر ما هست. چرا ما نباید غنیسازی داشته باشیم وقتی که همه این حق رو قوانین بین‌المللی حقوق بین‌الملل به ما میده؟ میگن شما نباید داشته باشید چون ما نگرانیم. چون اونها نگرانن ملت ایران نباید غنیسازی بکنه. و این اصلا از طرف ملت ایران پذیرفتنی نیست. چرا؟ چون پذیرش سلطه دیگری هست. اصلا فارغ از این که ما به غنیسازی نیاز داریم یا نداریم.
This comes as Iran says it has received elements of a US proposal for a nuclear deal. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi confirmed the development in a post on X. He said Oman's Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi visited Tehran on Saturday and shared details of the proposal. Araghchi added that Iran will respond in line with national interests and principles. The White House confirmed the proposal and urged Tehran to accept it. US Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stressed that President Trump remains firm. Iran must never obtain a nuclear bomb. Meanwhile, US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff delivered what the White House calls a detailed and acceptable offer. This comes ahead of a sixth round of talks between the two countries. The date and venue are yet to be announced, however. We now move on once again. China has issued a strong warning to the United States, saying it should not play with fire over Taiwan and denouncing remarks made by US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. Speaking at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, Hegseth had accused China of credibly preparing to use military force and rehearsing for an invasion of Taiwan. In response, Beijing has said that it had lodged solemn representations with Washington and strongly deplores the remarks. The Chinese Foreign Ministry reiterated that Taiwan is an internal affair and warned against the US against the issuing as a bargaining chip to contain China. China, which did not send its defense minister to the summit, also rejected US accusations of militarizing the South China Sea, stating that there had never been any issue with navigation in the region. It accused the US of turning the Indo-Pacific into a powder keg by deploying weapons in the disputed waters. We're now joined by Jim Rice once again to discuss this in further detail. Thank you, Jim. China has warned the US, quote unquote, not to play with fire over Taiwan. How serious do you think this warning is, Jim?
Well, thanks for giving me a chance to talk about this issue, because this is very important for people like me who live in this region. I believe that, if we just back up a moment, we can't really look at China, Taiwan without including the wider region, which includes the Philippines. And for the past several years, the PRC has been using its military, including its Navy, its Coast Guard, its maritime militia, and hundreds of fishing boats to bully and harass and prohibit Filipino fishermen who depend upon livelihood from the sea, as well as the legitimate interest of the Philippine Coast Guard. So if I could just, again, mention this earlier, the PRC has laid claim to the entire South China Sea since the late 1940s. And in 2016, in a case between the Philippines and China, which China boycotted, the Permanent Court of Arbitration struck down and invalidated China's claims to the so-called 9-dash line. But China has ignored the ruling and ignored international law and has continued to step up its bullying against the Philippine Coast Guard, as well as fishing boats in the region, and denying their traditional fishing grounds. This issue, I believe, the reason I'm mentioning this issue of the Philippines and China is it can't be isolated from China and Taiwan, because what China has been doing in the Philippines is using what is called gray zone warfare, which brings conflict right up to, but not over the line of armed conflict where people get killed. So in terms of playing with fire, I would suggest that the PRC has basically been doing what it always does, which is bully its smaller regional neighbors and deny the facts. Taiwan is, in fact, a democratic nation. It's a sovereign nation. And China's denial of this just is simply flying in the face of reality.
Jim, So China responded to Pete Hegseth's comments at the Shangri-La dialogue and said that the US is the biggest troublemaker in the region, the biggest source of instability in the region. Is there any truth to that statement? What's your analysis of US foreign policy in the Indo-Pacific, and does China have some weight behind this statement?
Well, as always, China is basically misrepresenting the facts. As I mentioned with regard to the Philippines and China, the Biden administration over the past 4 years carefully built up an alliance of the Australia, Japan, the Philippines, and the United States in trying to counter the obvious aggression that the PRC has been carrying out against the Philippines for years. As you know, the Philippines is a smaller country. It lacks the military heft of the PRC, and it needs to have regional allies. And when China talks about the United States as troublemaker, they carefully omit the fact that Japan and Australia and the Philippines are basically banding together to try and offset the aggression of the PRC.
Jim Rice, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. We now move on once again. Dozens have been arrested in Turkey in a fresh wave of crackdowns. Police detained 30 people in Istanbul and Adana, and 47 arrest warrants were issued. Those detained include municipal mayors and opposition CHP officials. This comes as Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu remains in prison, where he was jailed in March over corruption and terror charges, which he denies. In a letter from prison, he urged supporters to resist what he called an unjust order. The latest arrests mark the fifth round of action against the opposition. Over 110 people have been arrested so far. The government says the judiciary is independent, but critics call the moves politically motivated. On Saturday, 87 more people were arrested in Istanbul during the Gezi Park anniversary protests. Rights groups, including Amnesty International, have condemned the mass arrests. The UN has also expressed serious concern about the issue. We stay in Europe. Poland heads to the polls for a pivotal presidential runoff that could shape its future path, either reinforcing its nationalist conservative trajectory or steering the country towards a liberal pro-European Union values. President Andrzej Duda is stepping down after 2 terms. The runoff follows a tightly contested first round and is being closely watched across Europe and the United States. In Poland's previous election in 2020, the conservative populist incumbent Andrzej Duda narrowly won the second round vote against the pro-Europe mayor of Warsaw, Rafał Trzaskowski, by 51% to 49%. This time it could be even closer. Polls show the difference between Trzaskowski and the nationalist right-wing historian Karol Nawrocki, who is backed by the Law and Justice Party, which ruled Poland from 2015 to 2023, to be within the margin of error. We move on to the United States now, where Elon Musk has denied a report that he used ketamine and other drugs extensively last year on the 2024 campaign trail. A New York Times report said that the billionaire advisor to the president, Donald Trump, used so much ketamine, a powerful anesthetic, that he developed bladder problems. In response, while posting on X, Musk said, "To be clear, I am not taking drugs." The New York Times was lying. His post further read, "I tried prescription ketamine a few years ago and said so on X, so this is not even news. It helps for getting out of these dark mental holes, but haven't taken it since then." Meanwhile, Musk first dodged a question about his drug use at a bizarre farewell appearance on Friday with Trump in the Oval Office. During this event, Tesla and SpaceX boss sported a noticeable black eye as he formally ended his role at Doge. Musk has previously admitted to taking ketamine, saying he was prescribed it to treat a negative frame of mind and suggesting his use of drugs benefited his work. News from the sporting world now. Paris police have arrested nearly 300 people after PSG's historic Champions League win over Inter Milan. Celebrations turned chaotic as fans flooded the streets around the Parc des Princes and the Champs-Élysées. Officers fired tear gas and used water cannons to contain the crowds. Police said most of the arrests were for fireworks and public disorder. There were clashes between police and fans, with several fires lit near the stadium. A car was also set ablaze and dozens were detained early on. Meanwhile, PSG supporters celebrated their first ever European title, singing and dancing throughout Paris. Here's what a PSG fan had to say.
À un certain moment, et là, cette finale, elle m'a touché en plein cœur. C'est-à-dire que l'excitation était au rendez-vous et surtout l'émotion. Et comment dire, j'arrive pas à poser des mots là-dessus parce que c'est quelque chose que j'ai jamais ressenti. C'est comme de la fierté, mais aussi, comment dire, je me sens bien. Voilà. Vive Paris!
French President Macron praised the team, calling it a day of glory. A victory parade is set for Sunday in Paris. In Grenoble, a car accident during celebrations injured 4 people, 2 seriously. Police say it was not intentional. The driver is in custody and authorities now remain on high alert. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.